Everyone to the Clearinghouse on Women's Issues, and today we're looking at the future of women in Afghanistan as we've been watching the unfolding horror of what's happened, especially with the pullout in August of U.S. Troops and people. We've been filled with fear for women and what's going to happen, and filled with anger because we've been there for 20 years trying to get people, and women in particular, into leadership, and now we seem to be being pushed backwards. And I don't look on it as colonialization as much as giving people their rights to speak, which every community and every society should have. So we've got some wonderful speakers today, and I'm going to turn it over to Sue to introduce our first one.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Clearinghouse on Women's Issues meeting for October. I'm delighted to introduce our first speaker, who's the fabulous Eleanor Smeal. Eleanor Smeal is the president of the Feminist Majority Foundation, the Feminist Majority, and publisher of Ms. Magazine, among her many responsibilities and titles. And she was also and has been a continuous leader on major feminist issues like the Equal Rights Amendment. Has led many of the major Washington marches for women's rights. And I'm sure you all know her as the former president of NOW for many years. Ellie has contributed much to all kinds of women's issues. And in particular, she has helped the U.S. recognize the problems in Afghanistan since the Taliban takeover in 1996. Ellie called attention to the atrocities that the Taliban was committing against women during the first takeover, and was even nominated for a Nobel Prize on that. Maybe Ellie will start out by telling how she first became aware of all the problems against women in Afghanistan as part of her talk, an overview on the continued renewed atrocities after 20 years of progress, and suggestions for what we should be doing for the future. Look forward to hearing from Ellie Smeal. And Ellie, if you wouldn't mind, take it away.
Okay, thank you so much, Sue. I'm so glad to. I see some old friends in the group, and if anybody has questions, we're going to take them afterwards. But anyway, I'm going to try to go as fast as I can so that we can cover a lot of territory. The Feminist Majority Foundation got involved in 1997. The Taliban, there was a civil war, and the Taliban emerged first, took over Herat in 1994, and 2 years later took over Kabul, the capital, and essentially took over the whole country. And so the regime lasted from 1996 to 2001. 96 was important. Well, the whole thing is in the shadow of, at the exact same time, 1995 was the Fourth World Conference on Women, sponsored by the United Nations. It was in China, huge. It's the conference in which Hillary Clinton declared, as the First Lady, that women's rights are human rights and human rights are women's rights. That was the whole theme. Now this is now, that's 95. 96, Taliban takes over essentially Afghanistan and starts issuing decrees that were just ghastly, and I didn't know if they could possibly be true. They were just little AP, Associated Press stories, very small, saying the following. They first took over, they stopped all schools, they stopped women working Women at that time were about 70% of the school teachers. And so when they collapsed, when they said women couldn't work anymore outside the home, they essentially collapsed the school district, the schools. And instead of millions of children being able to go to school, no girls could go to school, only boys, and they were down to maybe 1 million boys going to school. So the boys were injured, but the women, it was no more schooling from kindergarten all the way through university. Well, in addition, they closed hospitals to women. Women were a large portion of the nurses and doctors in Afghanistan. And when they said women couldn't work, guess what? Collapsed the healthcare system. And then they said, well, no female from baby on up could go to a hospital. Imagine, nobody can go to a hospital who's a female. Secondly, or thirdly, these are the kinds of things that they just cut off. It went to such ridiculous levels that you couldn't wear white socks. If you're a woman, you had to be covered from head to toe in a burqa, which was not customarily worn at the time, especially in the cities. But you had to wear this thing. They meted out punishment immediately. They turned the soccer stadium into an assassination stadium in which they delivered capital punishment by shooting people in the head, and frequently women. It went on. I kept thinking, it can't be. This is just too bad. I mean, maybe we're exaggerating. So I went to the State Department. They said, no, it was worse than what they're reporting. We went to the United Nations authorities. They said it was terrible and it was worse than it was being reported. Anyway, every place we went, we were told how bad it was. In addition, we went to human rights groups that were global. We always had a global perspective, but we didn't have a global program. And they said their plates were filled. If we wanted to do something, why don't we just lead it? So eventually, that's what we did. By 1997, we started a campaign, and we treated it, frankly, how we would treat a campaign here, because our goal was to make sure the United States and the UN did not recognize the Taliban as a legitimate government. Anybody that treated half their population like this should not be recognized and normalized. And so we started a letter writing campaign. We used, in those days, although the internet had gone up, it wasn't used for this kind of thing. So we used direct mail and everything else. We delivered hundreds of thousands of letters to the Clinton administration, urging them not to recognize the Taliban. And eventually, in honor of the Women's Day, of the May Day, and it would have been May 1998, they announced in the East Wing of the, to a whole women's audience, the president, some of his cabinet members, and the Secretary General Kofi Annan all announced that the UN and the United States would not recognize the Taliban. There was no question our campaign had impact. Now, fast forward, or maybe no fast forward, we stayed involved. We met with the president, we met with the First Lady, we met with Madeleine Albright, we met with as many people as we could, and developed a campaign. One of the things we wanted was for the United States to start a scholarship program for Afghan women who were refugees in the Pakistan span. By the way, during this period, 13 million Afghans left the country. And it's essentially, if you could leave, you did leave. And so, but there was no, the conditions in the refugee camps were very, very difficult and really bad. So anyway, we developed a staff that could specialize in this area. We sent teams into the refugee camps. We asked who was the Taliban? We kept asking that question. The people then kept saying Pak, meaning Pakistan. Why did they say they were Pakistan? Is that a lot of the Taliban did not speak Farsi, the language of Afghanistan, Dari. They spoke Urdu, the language of Pakistan. So they were convinced that the leaders were from Pakistan. Anyway, I want to go, we stayed at it. For 20 years, we've worked on this project. We have eventually had a scholarship program where at least somewhere around 30 students, Afghan women students would, who were from Afghanistan, came to the United States for education, and we sponsored them. We are still, our scholarship program goes on to this day. Basically, we fought, when we started, they had no phones really to communicate with. They had to rebuild their whole educational system. So fast forward until when the Taliban takes over. About 157 colleges were operating. Women were admitted to colleges. We were probably between about 25% of the students. In some of the schools, better schools, we were more like 40% of the students. Basically, women, we had a new constitution was formed. They were guaranteed a certain percentage of seats in the parliament. They filled those seats and then some. Medical school, law schools opened up to them. They became lawyers, doctors, judges, teachers. In fact, we're now a significant portion of the teachers again. And it goes on. Every year there was progress. It wasn't easy and it wasn't perfect. I mean, we're going from almost a zero ground, minus zero ground, to equality. But I couldn't get over how fast in many ways it was going, because basically people the world around, I'm convinced, want their children to be educated. They want them to have better opportunities. And so basically, even though we came from zero education, but it was just those 4 years. Before that, and then there was a civil war. I mean, it's so much war and hardship. But in the 70s, they were moving towards a constitutional democracy before the Civil War and the fighting started. So you weren't really starting from ground zero. You were starting from a place that there was movement forward, and tremendous gains have been made in the last 20 years. However, Trump decides, the Trump administration decides to create talks between the United States and the Taliban, and omitted the Afghan government. And before we knew it, in February of 2020, they signed an agreement. The agreement was supposed to reduce the violence. The Taliban had been essentially a hit and run. They did a lot of suicide bombings, a lot of assassinations, etc. This went on for the whole 20 years. But there was periods it wasn't as big. But towards the end of this period, they kept on doing more. We signed an agreement under the Trump crowd to say that we would leave in May of 2021. And so basically when Biden came in, he inherited this agreement and unfortunately moved forward with it, although he delayed the date the United States would leave from that May area to August 31st. I want to go right into now very fast what the Taliban has already done. By the way, nobody predicted this would happen this fast. Everybody thought that it wasn't going to be good, us leaving. Experts, military, everybody said that. But on the other hand, no one thought the government would collapse. And And it took 11 days once they took over, entered Kabul. Anyway, what did the Taliban do the minute they actually took over? They closed girls' schools, girls' access to schools. They didn't do it like a decree like they did in the past. They just said that they want to change the schools to make them Islamic, and so they have to reconfigure. For college, that was from K through 12. For college, the colleges were open, and so they decided to allow the girls, young women, to stay in college if it was a private school. But if it was a public school, they closed their ability to go to school. Like Kabul University became all male. They also said that if there was even a private school, that the girls could only have as professors women or elderly men. And if that was not, if there weren't enough of professors to meet the demand, they would have to be segregated from the men if it was a co-ed class, so that the young men could not see the woman, or vice versa. It's been just horrible. One of the first things they did was they closed, literally the day that they got in, all the domestic violence shelters. Now, how do they do this? They literally had lists of where they were, and they went and they closed them. Fortunately, the women had warning, and so they started, they fled. The women administrators, the women workers, but they still have the list, and they are still looking for them. We believe if they get them, they will be assassinated. So essentially, women leaders of all kinds decided they had to get out, that they would be assassinated. So it's women parliamentarians, women judges. In fact, some women judges were assassinated. 2 Supreme Court justices were assassinated. Women journalists, women in all walks of life. And so by the time United States remember, this all happens on August 15th when the government collapses. Between August 15th and August 31st, when the last of the US troops leave, all kinds of Afghan women's rights leaders, et cetera, and women in positions of power or participation, or professors, whatever, that started leaving because they felt that their lives were in danger. It was the big evacuation. We have participated in it, and we are happy that we've helped some to leave, but far too many people have been left behind, women and men who were working on progressive policies are in hiding, trying to still get out. Thousands did get out, but not enough. One of the things that we've done also is we've written an open letter to President Biden and Harris, signed by 85 organizations and some very prominent individuals, that the US must not abandon Afghan women. We have made commitments. The reason there were so many women in power, so much progress, maternal mortality rates going down, education rates going up. I could go on all the major gains, but was because we supported gender equality projects to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. We were encouraging it every inch of the way, and they wanted to do it. The soccer teams and women's soccer teams, let's just go through what they have now done in just this short 2 months. They have said no woman can participate in sports. The soccer team has fled. It's one of the people that their first edict was no music. And so the music, the Women's Symphony fled. They closed the domestic violence shelters. They limited education. They now are saying that women should not go to work for their own safety. I mean, so essentially they closed jobs for women. I could go on. It's just been horrible. We believe that humanitarian aid must be conditioned on the treatment of women. We must insist that it goes to women as well as men, girls as well as boys. They need humanitarian aid because the economy has collapsed. They're in an historic drought, and food is short supply. In fact, people are starving. The conditions are horrible, and we cannot desert, but we have to put conditions. And one of the other conditions is we cannot recognize the Taliban as a legitimate government. It is a terrorist group, and recognizing them would normalize subhuman treatment for women and for several kinds of castes. There have also been religious minorities they've been killing. Two of the Shia mosques have been bombed. I could go on. Conditions are horrible. We believe we must stand with the Afghan women, and girls in their hour of need, and we must not recognize the Taliban. That's as fast as I can do it. I'm trying to hurry because I want to make sure the other speakers speak. People ask me, what can you do? Don't forget the Afghan women. Do not forget them. This is not a movement that's going to stay just in Afghanistan. If they could, this could be a worldwide movement. We must know what's going on there. It's very hard. Our staff is in communications with Afghan people literally daily in Afghanistan, as well as those now in exile. We must make sure that we help those who are here. We think that about 125,000 will arrive here. We hope that we can help them with education, continuance, and green cards, and welcome them in every way that we can. This is a huge catastrophe. We have to stay informed. We must change our foreign policy, and we must not recognize this as normal behavior or a normal regime. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellie. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Megan Corrado. I'm the VP for Global Issues with CWI and the Director of Policy and Advocacy with the Alliance for Peacebuilding. Appreciate that sobering presentation, Ellie. Now I'd like to turn it over to one of our esteemed speakers. For security reasons, we're going to keep her off camera and not go too much into detail about her bio, but to say she is an incredible Afghan woman leader. She has worked diligently for many years to promote the rights of women and girls, particularly in the field of education. So we're so honored to have you.
Thank you so much, Megan. And thank you so much, Ellie, for giving us a comprehensive and a detailed picture of what is happening in Afghanistan. It's very important for people to know. Thank you so much for doing that incredible job. I'll start with that. It's the 72nd day of the fall of Afghanistan to the group, which the US fought against for 20 years to only bring them back to power. It is the 72nd day for women in the workforce, including female teachers who have been homebound. It is also the 72nd day for girl students in grade 7 and up who see their brothers go to school, but not them, only because of their gender. This is not new. It is an experience I lived as a teenager in the late 1990s. My dream of becoming a medical doctor shattered in a matter of minutes when I saw the university gate locked with a flyer indicating that classes have been canceled until further notice. No one knew what had happened until we later found out that the Taliban have banned women from getting an education. The Taliban were not only self-claimed rulers of Afghanistan, but were also ruling Afghan refugees in Pakistan. I exactly know how it feels to be denied the right to getting an education, to be denied of your dreams and aspirations and left in absolute uncertainty. In my case, I have been very lucky. If it wasn't for my father, I do not think I would be talking to you today. He taught me that life is meant to throw challenges. Some were expected, but most were completely unpredicted. Yet life goes on, which makes it precious, as it always leaves room for hope. So I started tutoring girls in my neighborhood, learning computer skills, taught adult basic digital skills, saved some money so that I could one day go back to my home village and teach my villagers, including my cousins, who had no idea what a school looks like. After the fall of the Taliban in 2001, that is what I exactly did, starting with a literacy class, which led to the establishment of the first girls' school in my village, followed by 5 more schools in other remote areas. When I got a full scholarship to study academic journey in an all-women school, where I felt included and supported and dared to dream big. And I did dream big. In 2009, I returned home with a plan to establish an all-women community college, which a few years later transitioned to a 4-year degree granting higher education institution. Afghanistan's first and only nonprofit social enterprise college offers education to over 900 students in economics, law, and management. I'm an example of thousands of Afghan women who put their ideas into action and made sure that women and girls are equipped with skills so that they actively participate in moving Afghanistan forward. For example, a good friend, Shabana Basij Rasik, who during the Taliban regime in 1990s would dress like a boy to get an education in secret schools. She founded SOLA, Afghanistan's first and only boarding school for girls. Farishta Frough gave Afghanistan its first coding school, Code to Inspire. Since 2001, we have come a long way. We got about 9 million school-age students enrolled, over 18,000 primary and secondary schools opened. We had over 220,000 teachers, of whom 60% were women. Over 13,000 new schools have been built so far. Girls' enrollment increased from almost 0 to 2.5 million by 2018. The female literacy rate almost doubled from 17% to 30%. Child marriages dropped by 44%. That is huge success to be made in 20 years. However, we also should acknowledge and realize that we also had shortcomings to work on. According to UNICEF, 3.7 million school-age children were missing out on education, and girls made 60% of those children. About 7,000 schools have no building, and more than half have minimal infrastructure. Despite millions of dollars of aid flooding into the education sector, about 60% of teachers have received only 2 years teacher training. The rest of the teachers have only high school graduate diplomas, and some even have middle school or only middle school graduates. In 2015, thousands of teachers, schools, and students were identified as ghosts. Almost 1 in every 12 school was a ghost school. It did not exist. The same year, thousands of teachers took the streets demanding an increase in their salary, which only ranged between 6,500 up to 13,500 AFs, which roughly estimated at that time would be around between $100 to $120 per month. So the parliament approved an increase of 2,000 AFs in monthly salary. The bill passed, the teachers were happy, but the law never came into effect. Teachers have not received their salaries since last spring. Although there's a ban on protests, a few days ago, hundreds of female teachers protested, asking the Taliban to pay them past due salaries. Now, I do not think if the Taliban, who have been not recognized and who are sanctioned internationally, care about the chaos made by the former government. It only would mean validation that the former government was corrupt, who has failed in serving the Afghan people, which is true. So much more could have happened. So much more could have been achieved with the billions of dollars aid we received over the last 2 decades. Probably it is the failure of the former government, comprised of the so-called technocrats, that the Taliban use as a justification for how badly their work, their comeback is needed, and that they have got all the support of the public. The Taliban's de facto Minister of Education, Maulawi Munir, in his inaugural address said that no PhD degree, and I quote, "No PhD degree, master's degree is valuable today. You see that the mullahs in Taliban that are in power today have no PhDs, masters, or even a high school degree. But they are the greatest of all," end quote. Earlier this month, the Taliban's Minister of Higher Education said that those, again, quote, "who have graduated from high schools during the past 20 years are of no use." Do the Taliban plan to invest in better education if they are criticizing the education of the past 20 years? Who will they educate? How and what for? I think these are the questions that only time will tell. They have banned secondary education for girls. As Ellie said, female teachers of secondary schools are at homes. The public universities are closed. They have allowed private universities to resume, but female students have to abide by the new decree that makes segregation by sex and wearing a niqab, face covering, mandatory for all women. In that 9-article decree, there is no reference made to men. While they do not like to co-education and they might have supporters among the general public, logistically, it is extremely difficult to have a segregated higher education. Women make only 5% of the students in higher education. Therefore, having small classes is not what institutions could afford financially. Additionally, we do not have enough female faculty, which the Taliban also recognizes a gap, which is a good thing, but they also have a solution. And the solution makes you wonder. So the Taliban in their decree says, where hiring a female lecturer is not possible, as Ellie said, elderly male teachers, but with good characters, can teach the female students. Now, how do we know who has good character? And how do we discriminate against other teachers? And why should we do that? The question is, where do we go from here? How do we change the current state of education? Can we do anything about it? Well, as my father's daughter, who has taught me about hope, I believe yes. Today's Afghanistan is not what it was in mid-90s. Years of exhaust, particularly in 80s and 90s, have taught us tough lessons. Today, Afghanistan has more educated men and women than ever before. Today's Afghan's youth are equipped with knowledge and skills needed in the 21st century. I must say that to have a hope for a better version of ourselves, for a better future and world is still possible in Afghanistan. I remain hopeful, for hope coupled with determination guarantees the desirable change. This is the lesson my life experience have taught me. And this is the lesson that many Afghan women believe in. That is why, building on lessons learned in addressing pandemic, my teachers and colleagues in Afghanistan and my friends here in North America are determined to continue to invest in our students' education. We will expand our blended learning program, offer online education, and prepare particularly our female students to enter the workforce in the digital economy if the Taliban continued to take them away from the workforce in presence. A computer with access to internet is all what they would need to utilize their skills, make a decent living at the safety of their homes, free from discrimination and danger. While the Taliban may resist change, the current Afghan generation is a change maker. Therefore, I call on international community to do not abandon Afghanistan. Do not stop funding national development projects. Identify local organizations and support them in advancing their vision for a brighter, peaceful, and stable Afghanistan. For it's not only the right thing to do, it is our responsibility as global citizens. It is particularly responsibilities of the countries that invaded Afghanistan for the past 20 years and left Afghanistan without any plan. And Harry left people abandoned and violated. Second, the international community should make sure that they come up with a transparent system in dispersing aid and other social and essential services. Work with the Taliban as they govern Afghanistan, assess their work, measure their progress, and ensure that they are accountable for every dollar they get in aid to support people. Finally, make sure that every Afghan's basic human rights are protected, that women and men, girls and boys have access to education at all levels, and that they are part of the workforce. Also, our country experienced brain drain, and it will continue to grow. This is not what our country can afford. We are a country of over 35 million people. In order for these people to survive and have a better future, we need educated people. We need all those people who have left Afghanistan, but at the same time, I realize that their return would mean losing their life. Therefore, the international community should come to terms with the Taliban to ensure that that safety is provided to people who are hiding in Afghanistan right now, as we speak, and those who would like to return at some point are also protected. Like myself, I did not get an education to spend the rest of my life in the diaspora. I spent 18 years of my life in Pakistan as a refugee. I was only a refugee, a number, nothing else. I got education to go back to my country, live in my country, and work alongside the people at home. Thank you.
And just know you have a community of women right here today with you that are standing shoulder to shoulder, and greatly appreciate your recommendations and thoughts. Now I'd like to turn it over to Stacy Schinber. She's the Senior Program Officer with the International Civil Society Action Network, also known as ICANN. She's also a key member of the U.S. Civil Society Working Group on WPS. Apparently, she and I work closely together. And I will just say ICANN has been doing some tremendous work around the world, but really in Afghanistan over the last few years, They were instrumental in supporting women in their participation in the peace process, both getting them to Doha and then working around the country to incorporate women's perspectives into the process, as flawed as that process may have been. But yes, I will turn it over to Stacy now. Thank you so much for being here.
Great. Thank you so much, Megan. It's wonderful to be with all of you, and especially to be on the panel with Ellie. I know your work for many years in terms of building peace and advocacy and education in Afghanistan. And so as a fellow graduate of one of the 7 sister schools, I feel the connection of sisterhood as we work to support the rights, of course, and safety of Afghan women, but women everywhere. So it's great to be with all of you. I will go ahead and share my screen so that you can see some of the slides that I have prepared. And let's start at the beginning. All right, so assuming all of you can see my screen. As Megan said, I work with the International Civil Society Action Network, or ICANN. We were founded back in 2006, and our mission is to promote inclusive and sustainable peace in countries affected by violent conflict, extremism, militarism, and closing political space. And we do this by trying to shape and influence peace and security policies from local to international levels, ensuring a gendered lens or gendered component to them, and also by sustaining and strengthening a global movement of women peace builders. You can look at our website later, which I'll share in the chat, to read more about our work in women, peace, and security. But we produce a lot of publications providing gendered analysis of different issues. We conduct a lot of advocacy. As Megan mentioned, we're one of the founding members of the Civil Society Working Group on Women, Peace, and Security. And we provide support and resources in the form of grants to our women peace builders globally. And we connect them through our global network called the Women's Alliance for Security Leadership, so that they can exchange experiences and learn from one another. Our approach is, we'd like to describe it as personal, professional, and institutional support to our partners. Personal in terms of the kind of solidarity and close relationships that we have with them. We are intimately connected on WhatsApp and through weekly Zoom calls and through all the different forms of communication these days to accompany them in their journeys. Professional support in terms of trusting their experience and their local context and kind of following their lead to determine what kind of work needs to be done. And institutional support in terms of the grant making. And I think we're one of the few grant making mechanisms that provides a lot of flexible support, not only for specific projects, but really to build the capacity of their organizations so that they can sustain their work for the long term. I mentioned our global network, WAS, the Women's Alliance for Security Leadership. It was founded back in 2015, but today it's over 90 organizations across 40 countries, including Afghanistan, of course. We now have about 8 partners in Afghanistan. And just to mention, our other programs include one on gender and extremisms, because many of our partners work to prevent and counter violent extremism. And we've produced a lot of publications and analysis on the gendered aspects of that topic. Our Innovative Peace Fund is our program that is our multi-donor grant-making mechanism, which provides not just funding, but a lot of strategic advice and mentoring and accompaniment. So we assist our partners with everything from proposal and report writing to financial management, M&E risk assessment, and due diligence. And over the years, I wanted to give some examples of the kind of support that we've provided in Afghanistan. As I mentioned, we have about 7 or 8 partners there, and this is just a sample of some of the work that they've done over the years. They've produced peace building training manuals to connect local peace builders with government officials. They've supported the Afghan High Peace Council with inclusive and representative dialogues, often connecting the work at the provincial level to the national level. They've increased awareness and understanding of violence against women. One of our partners did that by creating a men's network where she provided a lot of training and support to the men to decrease not only violence against women, but also to resolve conflicts in local communities through mediation. Some of our partners also provide safe shelters for survivors of violence, and one of them continues to operate now, even under the current circumstances. And they've provided a lot of training to women and youth on conflict resolution methods and how to engage in dialogue. They've developed Women Peace Shuras, which is a local mechanism for being able to resolve a variety of different conflicts involving land and marriage arrangements and other family issues at the community level. They've developed campaigns, including a call for a ceasefire with the Taliban in the last year or two. And they've done, of course, a lot of coalition building through their own networks among Afghan women across Afghanistan to build a common approach to the peace talks. They've conducted direct advocacy, of course, with the Afghan government, with the US, UNAMA, and NATO, and throughout the COVID pandemic, raised a lot of awareness and provided awareness around the COVID response. Our Better Peace Initiative is a program that looks specifically at women's inclusion in peace processes and the gender dimensions of a lot of topics associated with peace talks. So through this program, ICANN provides training on inclusive and gender responsive mediation, and we've produced a lot of tools, including animations and 10-point guides, and offer advisory services on peace processes. Specifically in Afghanistan, I'll highlight kind of just in the last couple of years some of what we've done. We initiated an Afghan Women, Peace and Security Coalition in response to the very exclusive talks that took place between the US and the Taliban. We wrote a letter to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee requesting a hearing with the US Special Envoy to call for their inclusion in peace talks. Sorry about that. We've done a lot of bilateral advocacy with our various donor governments, also calling for women's inclusion. We've produced some of the material I mentioned, like our Better Peace tool, translating it into Farsi, also putting out a paper in Farsi on peace and women in Islam. Virtually, thanks to COVID and how connected we are now virtually, we've been able to join the UN Working Group on Women, Peace and Security in Kabul. We've trained Afghan women and politicians directly who are involved in the peace process, and certainly both put out our own statements and letters, as well as signed on to our partners' various statements over the years, and conducted a lot of public speaking and advocacy, both through public events and bilaterally. Since August 15th of this year, given the serious conditions now in Afghanistan, we've assisted a lot of our partners with visa processes and have compiled many evacuation lists. Unfortunately, we have not been particularly successful with the actual evacuation efforts, but we continue to persevere in that area. We've also been calling for the inclusion of Afghan women in the humanitarian response, and we produced action points specifically to ensure that the humanitarian response is gender responsive and that it's really taking the guidance directly from Afghan women. We've been continuing to try to find ways to get funding into the country and financially support our partners. And in terms of fundraising, we joined a small coalition to develop an Afghanistan Emergency Relief Fund, and I'll share the link for that as well. So I think, you know, as an American woman, definitely advocating with Congress is important to me, to address the resettlement challenges and really ensure that we live up to our responsibilities to support Afghan women. And I will share action points regarding gender responsive humanitarian action in Afghanistan. And I just wanted to finish or conclude by mentioning our She Builds Peace campaign, which is a campaign, a 5-year campaign we actually launched last year in 2020 to support women peace builders who are partners on the ground. And this campaign calls for their protection to keep them safe, which Afghan women certainly need now, as well as to different states to fulfill their obligations to include women in peace processes, to promote understanding of their work and to provide them with the resources to do that so they can sustain the important work that they do. So I will stop there for now and look forward to our continued discussion. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Stacey. Appreciate that. Sue, are we introducing one more speaker?
Marcia may have some comments. Marcia?
Yeah, thanks. So I agree with everything that everyone said. I just wanted to just repeat what Ellie said about Taliban's recognition. Right now, they are trying to encourage other countries to recognize them. I believe it should not happen. And, you know, I believe the pressure of the other countries should continue on the Taliban about women's rights and human rights and schools reopening. Today, there was another protest in Kabul. Women gathered, and of course, Taliban keep harassing them, and they are trying to prevent the media from, you know, reporting all these protests. They were very upset. Women protesters were very upset about why the United Nations and the world is silent, why they are not supporting them and standing by them as they used to. And they again asked the Taliban to open schools and let women work, and they asked the international community to help them and support them and hear their voices. So I believe we should continue these kinds of discussions. It's going to help women on the ground who are fighting for their rights, and pressure the Taliban that nobody would recognize them if they keep harassing women and taking away their basic human rights. Thank you.
Are there other Afghan women experts who would like to speak up now?
I can jump in a bit just on some additional advocacy and policy work that's being done. A couple different things. So one of the key issues that was referenced was the challenges getting money to support Afghan women and civil society and civilians more generally. OFAC, the Treasury Department's Office of Financial Assets, I'm totally messing up the acronym right now. Oh, control. OFAC issued 2 general licenses in September to facilitate the delivery of humanitarian assistance. Very important, something we advocated strongly for, but a critical omission, several of them, was it did not provide for education, and it didn't provide for any peace building and other development assistance. Obviously, no one wants to send direct funding or support to the Taliban, but these omissions are going to, you know, really harm the Afghan people. And a lot of times, this sort of decoupling of humanitarian and peace building is really harmful because oftentimes you need peace building and local negotiation to facilitate the delivery of humanitarian aid. So that's something we're working towards to make sure that, or to try to at least to expand the general licenses moving forward. Couple other things, there's a lot of work being done right now to expedite the processing of our folks. So those that are at risk, the sort of immigration regime is really challenging. So we have this special immigrant visa program, which is really for translators and interpreters that worked with US and NATO forces or on US government contracts. And then you have these sort of other categories, P1, P2, P3, and the P2 folks are generally our people, those who worked on grants and cooperative agreements, implementing programs funded by the US government. But it's sort of Kafkaesque, like you have to leave the country in order to start applying, but a lot of folks cannot leave, obviously, because of the insecurity situation. And there's hundreds of thousands of them. So really trying to get the government to come up with some innovative ideas. Are we doing virtual applications? Are we surging resources to the countries where folks are going around the border in the region, and trying to just expedite the whole process together? And then another item on the immigration front is that when folks are arriving here, they're generally being paroled in. So there's an immigration status called, it's not an immigration status, it's a vehicle to allow entry. It's called humanitarian parole. The challenge with that is it does not provide refugee resettlement benefits. So trying to make sure that those folks are cared for and given access to all the benefits that otherwise immigrants and refugees would be eligible for. So just a couple other irons in the fire right now, but would like to open it up to others who have comments, questions for our panelists. Thank you.
This is Ellie. Could I add one thing? I agreed with everybody, people were saying, but I just wanted to, when we talk about corruption, corruption was in the United States as well as in Afghanistan. And the major people who made out big were big corporations here who engaged in, who got the contracts, the military contracts. Most of the spending was done on military, but it was on the contractors. I could go into that, but I just want to put that out. Number 2 and 3, I think that we don't talk enough about is that the Taliban funding, who gave them money? And they got big money from countries. I believe still behind all of this is the desire to build an oil pipeline. When I hear OPEC, that's what made me think about it again. They want an oil pipeline through here to go to Pakistan and on to the east, Japan, and principally China. The other thing is the biggest cash cow they had, the Taliban, that kept them alive, was drugs. They make 90% of the heroin of the world. And we cannot forget that, because they got to be connected to the mob. I mean, to organized crime, let's put it that way. And if you think about the casualties we had 2,200 and some casualties. Of course, the Afghanistan had far more, 67,000 in their military alone. And they say 25,000, but you know it's much higher of civilians, huge casualties. But the other casualty the United States should add is the population's death rate from heroin, which is quite heavy. It's about, I don't want to say a number, but it's thousands every year. And every time I want to bring that up, people say that's not what this is about. Well, it's got to be about some of it, because it was a major, according to the UN, was it the UN? I think it was a study of the UN. It was the #1 supplier of funding for the Taliban. So I think we got to look at who benefits. Why is this happening? And I do not believe for 1 minute it's a religious conservative takeover. This is a terrorist takeover, which is using religion as an excuse. But you know, no religion teaches the ill treatment of women. And And what is that about? And I think it's about making people who can flee, flee, so that they can dominate what is left. And obviously, we spent our time too in these last months trying to get help and get women leaders out of there and get women students and civil service. I know we keep talking about translators and that, but we took out all our USAID, all the development people, the UN people, an awful lot of the civil workers. So that also helps to collapse everything. I mean, we took them out because they were going to be killed. I mean, there's obviously, I'm glad we could have so many people evacuate, but it is then a problem of how do you build up again? So anyway, I'm sorry, I wanted to bring this.
I know that there is legislation to establish a commission to delve into the whole sorry mess. I don't know the status of that bill right now, but I'm wondering if we couldn't encourage other efforts to really get at the facts, such as you have laid out and hinted at. I think, you know, the whole darn story really needs to be told. I think this is a worse mess than we had in Vietnam. Maybe not with the level of casualties, but just unbelievable corruption. And anyway, you know what, how we can describe this as a terrible experience, and the U.S. really shares a lot of responsibility for some of the good, undoubtedly. But the whole rest of the story really needs to be told. And I'm wondering if you have any suggestions on how we can push for full disclosure and a very comprehensive look at the whole history beginning back in the 90s of how we got involved and what was done and where the money went. As always, follow the money.
Well, SIGAR, which is the Special Inspector General for the Afghan Reconstruction, SIGAR, reports. Megan just put them into the chat list. Looks at waste, fraud, and abuse. They did over 440 audits. They also have a whole thing on lessons learned, and they have a whole report that's quite thick on gender equality, what worked and what didn't work, and how much money was spent on it. I want us to be very knowledgeable about what they found. We have met with them. We've met with their staff. We met with John Soko, who's the head of it. They've done an amazing job. And I think that they have a lot of, we who care so much have got to become very familiar with this. There's also a study that's been done by Brown University that is amazing. And if anybody wants it, we could figure out how to get it to you on what corporations were profiteers, American corporations. They took a huge portion of the money because a lot of the money, and we got to understand this, really never left the United States, right? I mean, so basically we've got to, and now if there's a commission, so much the better. I know that the Oversight and Reform Committee has been, of the House, has done hearings on all of this, but we cannot ignore this because basically, well, it's too long an answer, but we've been involved every inch of the way, and we recommended these people to be the head of this government. It isn't that, you know, I could go on and on. We played a big hand. We have got to know what went wrong, and so that we can improve our foreign policy. But and we can't think that, well, we've done the job and just pull out. We made commitments far beyond military commitments. And one of the commitments was to gender equality because of the damage that the Taliban had done. I could go on. I do think that in many ways, we have got to be involved now. Those of us care about women's equality and people. so that the wrong thing, that already the Taliban is saying that the reason it failed is because of the culture, and that the people didn't like them. There's no knowledge of that. They are very unpopular, the Taliban, extremely unpopular. And so, and it wasn't, the culture wanted to have education. They want healthcare. They want all the things that make human life more sustainable and more productive and happier. So basically, I just think we cannot fall for that argument. We've got to know more about what happened. And if you're interested in that kind of work, let us know, because we're going to dig in.
Thanks, Sally. Other questions? Just one thing to earlier, and Stacey sort of alluded to earlier, is the cataclysmic failure, the situation in Afghanistan, is related to the WPS agenda. Afghanistan, the act was passed in 2017, the first in the world of its kind. We have a strategy, we have implementation plans. Afghanistan was always going to be the test case. And, I think we can safely say it's been an abject failure. And you had these women who put themselves on the line, many of whom Stacy has supported and worked with for years, put themselves at harm's way, became targets, and were willing to fight even as they were being marginalized. And Stacy, not sure if you want to jump in and sort of talk about the experience of trying to get them in the room in Doha, and even trying to get them to Doha, and the visa issues that even if their own government was throwing up. So I don't know if you want to just chat about that a little bit.
Sure, no, happy to. It's as Megan knows, it's been a long struggle, and really our Afghan partners are the ones feeling the brunt of it. But back in, I think it was 2019, there were talks happening in Doha, and ICANN and others in our coalition kind of rallied around to raise funding and to be able to, facilitate their access to get them to Doha and provide whatever kind of support they needed. But the visas were not approved in time. And, this was just one example of many, I could tell you, where the lack of political will and the lack of states really assuming their responsibility to implement and prioritize the WPS agenda failed.
Thanks, Stacey. Other questions? Anybody else want to jump in? Before we leave today, I'm going to drop a link in the chat. So one thing we've been trying to do is there's been a lot of folks, many of whom like yourselves here today, that want to help. And so we've sort of put together a list of resources. There's a number of groups in the DMV area throughout the country that are, taking donations, food, clothing, books, toys for recently resettled Afghans here in the States and in the area. So that's just one small way if you're interested. There's a bunch of other organizations that are doing fundraising that are supporting Afghan women and girls. So happy to share that with you, and please feel free to circulate that in your own networks as well. Connie, I see you popped on camera. Do you have any comments you'd like to jump in?
Hi, this is Sue. While Connie unmutes to give her comments, I just want to thank you all for participating. And we all have a lot of collective work to do to help with all of these atrocities that are happening. Thanks very much to our presenters. What we'll be doing is we'll be preparing a summary that we will share with the presenters to make sure that they go over it, and that nothing in this public document would in any way harm them or their families that are back in Afghanistan. And so many thanks to people for participating. This isn't the end of the story. We have a lot more work to do. And as far as the Clearinghouse on Women's Issues, we won't be having a next meeting on Zoom until January. Our meeting in November is usually around the same time as Thanksgiving, so we cancel it. And we don't have a meeting in December for the same reason of the Christmas holidays. So thank you all, and particularly thanks to our presenters. Connie, do you want to have any comments?
I began on this topic wanting to learn more, and I think I've learned more than I ever wanted to know today. But in fact, it tells me that we have to give women back hope in Afghanistan as well as rights. And so we need to work really, really hard on that. And Ellie, exposing the corruption that went on our side of the fence is the thing that I think we need to know about. And it didn't just start with Trump. It didn't just start, it's been going on for 30 years probably, I would bet, if you do that research. So I think that's a really important topic that we should pursue, and it might be fun to even do one on that, to do a brown bag on that. But anyway, that's for the future. Thank you so much, Stacy, for your so well organized thoughts on what is happening, on what should happen, and where are we going to go from here. And Megan, thank you so much for your knowledge of the international, which brought this